Hello. Oh. Hmm. How are you? You, and especially you. You're my favorite. This the fourth viewer. The fourth viewer is my favorite. My favorite viewer is viewer number 4. Isn't that right? Mhm. The history of a journalist who is the first has told this world the truth about the great hunger in Ukraine. Gareth Jones, the man who has seen too much. Destroying Jones has been one of the least pleasant tasks which we had to undertake in these years of twisting facts in order to satisfy dictatorial regimes. But we did destroy him wholeheartedly and without protest, using those two-sided phrases. When that dirty deed was done, someone ordered vodka and snacks. A quote from a book that I got today about our favorite topic, genocide, and its favorite subtopic, the Great Hunger in Ukraine, which we'll be talking about soon. Pretty soon indeed. There are a few other books that I got on my radar. One of them is directly about Lemkin, and I guess it references the Holodomor in some way at some point. I'm gonna look for it now. Okay, Holodomor. Oh, there's one other book. Very well praised book. Raphael Lemkin, A Hero of Humankind. Apparently a very well received book by Agnieszka Bieńczyk, Misara and Sławomir Dębski. In memory of Raphael Lemkin on the 60th anniversary of the adoption of the Convention of Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide. It has a 10 out of 10 rating. But there's also the book Holodomor, the Great Hunger by Kurczycki Stanisław. I'm pretty okay. Holodomor, the Great Hunger in Ukraine in the years 1932 1933 as a genocide. The problem of awareness. So I need to get this book definitely. When was it published? Oh, it's in 2008. Which means, technically speaking, I might already have it somewhere on the shelf. How much is it? It's priceless. It doesn't tell me the price of the book. The book is priceless. Oh, this is very interesting as well. Holodomor, 1932-1933. The Great Hunger in Ukraine in the documents of the Polish diplomacy and espionage. So that's definitely a good book to look into. Who's the author? The choice, Jan Jacek Bruski. Jan Jacek Bruski. So I want to get that definitely. What else? To Kill with Hunger. To Kill with Hunger. The Soviet Genocide in Ukraine by Miron Dolot. In 1929, by wanting to destroy a wealthy class of peasants, Joseph Stalin has ordered a collectivization on all Ukrainian farmlands. Within the next years, through the Ukrainian farmland went a brutal Soviet campaign of confiscation, terror, and murder. The leftovers of food after the confiscation were not enough to feed the population, which resulted in a famine in which close to 7 million Ukrainians died. A touching testimony of a person who survived the Great Hunger is a description of everyday confrontation of the young Miron Dolot with the hopelessness of death and the hopelessness in front of being arrested and the abuse of family and friends, and also growing up, which was accompanied by the absolute control by the Soviet state on his life and the life of his the people that were his sort of, what's the term in English? Countrymen, that's the word. It is also a story about retaining your dignity in the face of barbarism and humiliation, and also an act of accusation aimed at this chapter of the Soviet history, which the Russian leaders still deny. Oh, there's a Super Bowl. There's so many things happening in the US right now, right? There's so many things happening in the US right now. It's hard to keep track. Is it the Super Bowl now? That is pretty... Is it actually the Super Bowl now? I didn't even know that. That brings that makes me question so many things. That just makes me raise so many questions in 2 hours and a bit. That is so wild. It make it. Ugh, I've got so many questions. I've got so many pressing questions. I'm gonna write them down. Okay. So how is everyone? I've been looking for some books, as you've seen. I need a lot of. Oh, Anna Applebaum, The Red Hunger. I already got that. Oh, Holodomor, the Polish victims of the Holodomor. In the presented book, Polish and foreign historians are looking at the topic of Polish victims of the Holodomor. I'm not sure if this is super relevant, but this is brave for competing with the Super Bowl. I'm actually surprised that the whole Progressive Victory organization decided to compete with Super Bowl with the canvassing and everything. That's actually something that I'm genuinely surprised, choosing the date of the Super Bowl for the political event. That is very surprising to me. That is a choice. And I'm wondering now who made that choice, to be honest. Now I'm wondering whose choice that was. Oh well. Isn't Super Bowl like a big deal in the US? A lot of people are super into it and stuff. Is that not a thing? Hello, Greater Ain't. So I am genuinely surprised. Let's see if there are any other books that I can get. God, I'm about to go broke. You should all donate because I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, and counting books. Ukraine in the years of collectivization and Great Hunger, 1929-1933. Robert Kuśnierz. This work is a okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books and counting. It's the biggest day in U.S. state religion of football Americano. Yeah, Super Bowl is a thing for a lot of people. In fact, my parents and I are going to support Spart to dinner for dinner because of the Super Bowl. I just got the food. I don't care about football. So a why would a political org choose this time to do anything? Actually, why would a political org choose to compete with Super Bowl? Also, what are we discussing exactly? We're not discussing anything yet, to be honest. Right now, we're just chilling and talking a bit before we discuss. We're not discussing anything. Hey, howdy. Books. Read Ringworld by Larry Niven. I'm looking for books about the Holodomor, about the genocide in Ukraine. I'm very topic specific about the books that I'm looking for right now. Hopefully they don't encourage conversers to interrupt people watching the game. That could backfire. That is such a weird choice. How long do people actually prepare for the event of Super Bowl? Do people actually take time to prepare for it over the weekend? Is the whole weekend dedicated to Super Bowl? Nobody wants to. Nobody wants to teach the foreigner about the Super Bowl. Well, a lot of people carpool, cookouts, beer, games. Does that include young people? What is the attitude of young people towards Super Bowl? I guess that's my main question for today in the US. What is the attitude of young people towards Super Bowl? Are young people fans of Super Bowl, or is it a boomer thing? Or is it just a thing that is universally beloved no matter what age you are? Get me to understand. Help me understand. My fellow USers. I think I had something that I wanted to react as well.
There's no
It's fairly diverse demographic of fans. So it's not like, I don't know, boomers love it and young people hate it, right? Jesus. You doing okay today, Lucy? I think so. I think so. Maybe high school or middle school age may be into it because their family has always been into it or they play on their own team. Okay, I get it. I get it. I think I'm okay. I think I'm pretty okay today. Also, it does kind of have the connotation to me of being a middle-aged man's absolute jam. Oh god. So what, young people, Zoomers won't be interested in it? Interesting. As you can see, I got a new book. I'm very monothematic, so it's the Gareth Jones book. About the man who has seen too much. Do you know who Gareth Jones is? Or maybe rather, do you know who Gareth Jones was? How much do you know about Gareth Jones? It smells nice. Today is what? Today is Sunday. And on Sundays, trade is not allowed, so most bookstores are locked. But the Museum of Polin, the Polish Jewish History Museum, was open, and it has its inner library, which was open, and it sells a whole variety of books, history books usually. And I got the Gareth Jones book. You seem more mellow today, so just want to check in on you. There's probably a lot of Zoomers into it. I don't know. Also, there's a fantasy football where you build your own teams with miscellaneous players from all the NFL. It's a popular online activity for a lot of football enjoyers. Interesting, as always. But do you know who Gareth Jones was? Do you have any knowledge of Gareth Jones? If you're a big watcher of Lucy Haze, then you might know who Gareth Jones was. You might know who Gareth Jones was. Do you like Super Bowl while we're at it? I haven't even asked if you like it or not. I am not a big fan of sports. Unfortunately, sports is not my jam. He makes me proud to be Welsh. You know Gareth Jones. Gareth Jones, the first journalist to uncover the horrors of the Great Hunger in Ukraine. We're gonna translate a little bit of the back of the book. In the 30s of the 20th century, a young journalist, Gareth Jones, take a few lonesome trips to the communist empire. As one of the few people from the West, he discovers the shocking truth of the situation of the USSR citizens. He talks with the members of the government apparatus and the state apparatus, and also with regular people, workers, peasants, and he witnesses with his own eyes the Soviet crimes against Ukraine. He hears about people dying from hunger, and will also soon learn about acts of cannibalism. After returning to the West, he tells the truth to the world about he he shares the truth about the communist paradise, and he comes under attack from corrupted Western journalists. Everybody tries to undermine his credibility. After a few years, he dies in unexplained circumstances. Was it because he uh, shared the truth? Was it because he shared the truth of the world? He was killed by the NKVD. And here are a few quotes. This is the best one. Walter Duranty, Russians hungry but not starving. Walter Duranty is a prime example of the fact that just because a journalist had won a Pulitzer, it doesn't mean that the journalist has integrity, that the journalist will produce good, balanced, informative, and fair works. Okay? Walter Duranty, a Pulitzer winner, has been known for basically being the father of Holodomor denialism. Here's a quote from his famous article, Russians hungry but not starving. We cannot speak, we cannot say that there is hunger. We cannot say that hunger reigns. Nobody dies of hunger. But what is common are deaths from diseases that are caused from not eating enough. As you can see, a bit of dishonesty on Walter Duranty's part. And this is what we will be dealing with. I'm looking forward to talking to people about the Holodomor, especially since it seems that among the bigger political creators there seems to be a consensus that there just is not enough evidence to establish intent when it comes to the Holodomor, or as we know it, the Great Hunger in Ukraine, which will be my task as a small streamer to establish such intent. Loner Box right now is in the US, so I have a bit of time to, let's just say, prepare. I'm going to probably write him once he is back from the US, and we're gonna set things up. Is there a specific person or event that caused the communist movement to derail onto the path of failure? No. No, there's not one person. I would say that it was the failure of the movement itself, the Bolshevik movement. I don't think you can actually place it on the lap of a single person. Lenin was pretty horrible. He was better than Stalin, but Stalin was who implemented a lot of the most horrible things, you could say, and created the idea of the Soviet man, among other things, through the Holodomor, by destroying the will of the Ukrainian people and creating for a long time a type of a Ukrainian person that could only be possible through the trauma of the Holodomor. As a really good book called The Bloodlands says, I have it here. I'm actually taking this notion from this book. It's in English, so it's. One moment, okay? I'm looking for it. Don't. I want to find it in a moment, okay? One moment. I have to. It's really well phrased in the book as well. There you go. I found it. Hundreds of thousands of orphans would grow up to be Soviet citizens, but not Ukrainians, at least not in the way that an intact Ukrainian family and the Ukrainian countryside might have made them. That is a very interesting and also very telling quote that explains to us that how this sort of trauma basically shaped the countryside and the people in a very specific way. That obviously would not have happened if the famine would not have happened, right? That I think that goes without saying. The creation of the Soviet man, which just happens to be a title of one of the books that I'm looking to get. The creation of the Soviet man, the so-called Homo Sovieticus. I'm passively familiar with Stalin as a highly paranoid dictator with an apathy for the well-being of those below him. I don't know anything really about his national policies or whatever. Generational trauma is such a bummer. Like, one of his biggest policies that he was extremely proud of, that was his little child. His biggest policy was, of course, the collectivization. The collectivization which directly led to the Holodomor. That was his. He was the author of the collectivization, among other things. The 5-year plan, which was supposed to industrialize the Soviet Union. He was actually a very hands-on person. A very specific hands-on person that had to personally oversee a lot of things. To the point that he was also like this in his private life. He had a special garden with vegetables, fruit, and many other things. A pretty big garden, to the point that he would proudly put what he grew there on the market. And his personal notes were full of daily orders on how his personal farm is to be run in great details. Elaborate on the collectivization of the 5-year plan. Like, the collectivization was basically an idea that the peasants would lose the private ownership of their lands, and would become parts of the state-owned sort of big farmlands, would become tied to the state-owned big farmlands, and nothing would belong to the peasants. Everything would belong to the state, and there would be organized cogs in state-run big farms, and that was supposed to be to produce much more effective results, better crops, etc. The machinery was supposed to be sort of given to the peasants, not given, but they were supposed to be allowed to use um, machines like tractors, etc., through special sort of points that would distribute those to the peasants. Um, it was more that Ukraine produced less for various reasons than the plan uh, assumed it should, and so the reaction was to harshen the required quota of it's a long story. I think the question is also what you understand as failure. Tankis obviously would say that Gorbachev was the traitor, but if you have any emancipatory idea of what communism should be, that is obviously nonsense. And then you have this to start earlier. I think, for example, of Engels' ideas of using forced labor to transform the economy, basically. So the split of Engels from Marx's ideas after his death is an interesting question. Right. Basically, the thing is, like, we had the war communism in the 20s, which caused Ukrainians to starve, which seems to be a common uh, thread in the history between Russians and Ukrainians when Ukraine is under the thumb of Russia. And then Lenin decided to sort of loosen the policy and allow the peasants to keep their land as a compromise and to participate in the free market, which the peasants were sort of careful about and worried about that it would be soon taken away. And it was taken away by Stalin, who decided to be more radical and do away with any compromise that Lenin introduced. Thank you for the tier 1 subscription. Thank you. So that is basically where we are in the whole thing. And then, of course, we are getting into the genocidal war that is happening right now. I will stand by it. Russia is currently waging a genocidal war against Ukraine, and you cannot convince me otherwise. And I am willing to substantiate that claim based on the UN Convention of Genocide. So basically the legally accepted one. We're not going to go into the 50 different definitions of genocide within academia. It's perfectly possible to substantiate Russia's war against Ukraine being genocidal right now through the UN definition. Also, the impact of World War One of how people thought of using killings is often not understood, and made the idea of sacrificing millions become. It made the idea of sacrificing a million become a thinkable idea. Right. Of course, we have to keep in mind that the idea of sacrificing millions was not exactly. It did not become a universally acceptable exactly idea everywhere, no matter where. Trump, Europe is yours, Putin. True. We'll look into it. I mean, I already know what was said, but we're gonna talk about it. The worst thing about it is the worst thing is about this whole thing is not what he says, and I mean Trump by this. The worst thing is not what he says. The worst thing is that he actually has a chance of winning the election. Now that is a terrifying thought, that a guy that says things like this might actually become president and then act possibly on those things that he's saying. Europe, abandon. Taiwan, abandon. I mean, it's just as bad for the US as for the countries that Trump so easily says he would abandon. I don't think it's a smart strategy to basically make the US into a totally unreliable partner in any sense of the word. Wasn't Trump supposed to be a big businessman? Isn't isn't it a pretty basic rule of business to not ruin any sort of relationships with business partners? Isn't that sort of like a big thing in business, not to mindlessly ruin all relationship with key business partners? Or is this not the Trump school of business making? We need a nickname for Putin. Tsar Nicholas, it was the last Tsar. Lenin, I don't know. Stalin was the red Tsar. What Tsar is popping? Huh. Well, he is a businessman who is used to go bankrupt. Well, I'm afraid that Trump's policy might end up just, I don't know, getting the US bankrupt, at least when it comes to its credibility internationally. So that's a businessman that is used to go bankrupt. Putin is playing the victim that Russia has been under threat of NATO when he claimed that he asked Bill Clinton if Russia could join NATO in good faith. Say what you will, that interview was a masterclass in manipulation. It only was if you know nothing of history. I'm gonna be quite honest. This interview was a masterclass in manipulation only to the people that know nothing. It might sound harsh, but it only works if you basically have no knowledge about anything when it comes to the subject of the history of this region of the world. The easiest response to the whole NATO is a threat would be to point out that in 1968 the USSR, through the Warsaw Pact, attacked Czechoslovakia on the pretense that NATO was encroaching on Czechoslovakia, even though that was not happening. The real reason why Czechoslovakia was attacked was because Czechoslovakia was trying to do reforms and move further towards democracy. That was the real reason. And wow, interestingly enough, Ukraine in 2014 wanted to move more towards a fair democratic system and was punished for it by invasion by Russia, the annexation of territory, the creation of the so called independent areas, and of course, the bad encroachment of NATO, which has been the playbook of the USSR from forever. It's been the playbook of the USSR forever. Even there's a very nice book from the perspective of a Warsaw Pact soldier, and he basically, among other things, explains how he had to deprogram himself from what he thought NATO was and what he actually learned NATO was. So it is a bit of annoying that we had examples of the exact same thing in the past and we don't seem to really learn from it, but we just look at every single case and say, oh, maybe NATO is really encroaching this time. Maybe it's not just an excuse this time. And I sincerely don't know why. This history is not secret. It's public. It's open for everybody to know what happened with all those invasions of the USSR that were done on the basis of NATO expanding, quote unquote. So I'm afraid I would not call the interview a masterclass in manipulation. I would rather call it a masterclass in uncovering ignorance and lack of knowledge of many people, especially including the person, um, sort of technically speaking, uh, Tucker Carlson, the person that actually interviewed Putin. Although in his case, I would just also contribute malice to him. In his case, I would say he is ignorant and illiterate about history and also malicious. All three. They're not exactly the exclusionary concepts. It's not mutually exclusive to be ignorant and malicious. Also, the idea of territory being important for defense um, of state is pre-nuclear thinking. As long as they have Königsberg as a point of threat, they don't need a buffer zone for practical purposes. It's just imperial thinking. That's right. I know woefully little about European history, honestly, particularly Eastern European history. It's dense, and I tend not to have the time or drive to actually study this stuff. I hear some info I keep in mind for a little window of time, and then practical life takes the brain space instead, just being honest. I mean, I'm not saying everybody should read about the history of Eastern Europe. That's actually not what I'm trying to say. It's okay not to know everything. Not everybody does not need to know everything. Okay? Everybody does not need to know the full history of every part of the world, what's happening everywhere. But what is important is when you listen to certain things being said, when you know that you don't know a lot about it, to be, first of all, very careful about how you take it in. Be very careful about believing what is being said, especially when it's said through from the mouths of people like Putin. And then if it's a very pressing and big thing happening, you can learn the broad strokes, and already you'll be equipped enough to be able to navigate nonsense spread by people like the leader of Russia. You know, it is impossible for a person to know everything. We can only know so much in a lifetime, and we can only focus on so much. So we also need to recognize our limitations, but we also need to recognize that we don't know certain things, and that certain things fed to us might be lies, misinformation, and other things based on that lack of knowledge. And I think that the person interviewing Putin should do their homework when it comes to these things. Well, it's physically impossible, so you might set yourself up for disappointment, thready. I'm afraid it's physically impossible, so unless you're immortal, in which case, sure. And super fast. Immortal and super fast. Also, you're white, which makes me suspicious of your claim. I'm suspicious of the claims of white names in the chat. You underestimate Trady's power. They can be stopped. That sounds like what Anakin said before his legs got chopped off. You underestimate my power. I mean, I haven't died yet, so who knows? I might be immortal. I mean, that might be very well the case. That very well might be the case. So, are you enjoying little talks like this? That are not particular segments, but are just us doing little bit of just talking about things. Is that a thing that this audience enjoys? Is that a something that gets traction within this little part of the I wish I knew everything. Well, you know, you could always read, keep yourself informed. Do your best. Do your best. I'm doing my best. I hope. I hope I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best about genocide. Genocide is my big topic. Do you trust my claims of immortality now? Said Freddy after getting the tier 1 subscription. Yes. Now I trust you. Now I trust that you can know everything, which technically means you can teach me. Which means that whenever I want to find something out, I just have to ask you, and you can type the answer in the chat, which is very useful. Here's the ID now. The claims, check out. Let's not investigate further. True. Let's see if there has been anything interesting going on lately. What do you think? Has there been anything interesting going lately? Or no? What is this? Okay. Let's see what President Sunday has to say. Are you interested in President Sunday's opinions on things? Or no? I need to know if it's even worth looking into this whole thing. It's 47 minutes long. Yippee, my knowledge will have no bounds. So are you interested in President Sunday's? Lucy, wanna hear a lame joke? Why do vampires always go out of to eat? They just wanna get a bite. We should play this Gaia 4. Speaking of vampires, we should play this Gaia 4. Do I have this Gaia 4? We're gonna check. Vampires, huh? You haven't answered if you're interested in the opinions of President Sunday. You have not answered this this big important question. Sometimes I care, but sometimes so smug he drives me up the wall. Isn't that good, to be driven up the wall? Is it about an actually relevant topic or about discourse? It's about discourse, of course. It is about discourse. Just warning. Fair warning, it is about discourse. So I'm already warning you on that front that it is indeed about discourse. There's a big discount on Armored Core 6 right now. Just so you know. 30%. Weekend deal on Armored Core. President Sunday is very smug, it's true. Well, but you can be smug and correct, no? It is possible to be both smug and correct. You might not like it, but some people are able to be smug and not wrong about things. Isn't Lucy the smuggest person? Isn't Lucy the smuggest streamer? I'd be sailing the 7 seas. I don't have this Gaia for. Lunar New Year. Happy New Year. Oh, there's some Vietnamese New Year sales. Murderers of the Yangtze River. How interesting. He's usually wrong whenever it comes to Xander Hall. Xander Hall has had a tough streak, hasn't he? How has Zanderhol been? Lucy, will you tell Hubby Bobby what for? Are you referring to something specific or in general? Are you referring to something specific? I will tell him what for when it comes to the Holodomor. That's for sure. But are you referring maybe to the current uh progressive victory canvassing thing, or what? What are you referring to? What is your reference preference? General. I think so. It's been a long time coming. Should call in to Destiny and tell him you're wrong about the Holodomor and just leave. And mic drop or something. I don't know. I'm still thinking. I'm still thinking on what to. You should. I should. But I still think that I'm not ready. That's the thing. I still feel like I'm not ready. It will be a fun watch. I still think I'm not ready though. I still feel I need to read and prepare more to be able to make a compelling case. I don't have enough prep, which I must fix. So you don't want to watch the President Sunday thing, huh? You don't want to watch the President Sunday thing? Is that another thing that you want to watch? Because if not, then we have a few topics to cover today. Especially big one is the Hungary one, because it sort of pertains to the rhetoric of Orban and the whole, technically speaking or theoretically speaking or officially speaking, the whole ethos of the Fidesz party, which seems to not be as solid, and surprise, surprise, there's not much integrity when it comes to the Fidesz party, the anti-child abuse party, the pro-family party, which had till very recently a president that decided to pardon a pedophile, a convicted pedophile, I might add, which I think it's fair enough to characterize it as creating a lot of controversy. I'm gonna leave soon because Super Bowl dinner, although I may or may not watch stream again later on my phone. Thank you. So it seems like the Super Bowl is a big event for you, after all. Seems like to you, the Super Bowl is a significant event after all. Which is... I like your pen. Those are the best with the multiple colors, right? That is nice. Can we fix Hungary? Hreti the Immortal says, no, we should give it back to the Austrians. Give them another whack at it. I mean, technically speaking, Hungary was not exactly under Austria before. So saying give it back to Austria is not exactly correct here. Actually, Hungary was not super displeased with the whole arrangement of the Austrian-Hungary Empire. Just so you know. No, I still only care about food. The Super Bowl is the means. I'm hungry. Would you like to take that time to donate to me and sort of fund my food fund? Hmm? I wish I could teleport food to you. Should try that buffalo chicken. Damn. Everybody's so hungry today. My Patreon has 0 money. Hold on. What? What? I hope this is just for me. Oh. Hungary. The blue pen has replaced the superior kitten staff. I mean, I still have it. Actually, no, I couldn't. I was wondering if I could just put the multicolor pen in the cat pen, but I can't. That unfortunately will not work. That will not work at all. That won't work. Oh, Kyle Kolensky has a saying about that. That famous person. Okay, let me see something real quick. I feel like. One moment, please, okay? I don't feel like watching this. You're right. Let's just look at like this. Oh, what is happening? Jesus. Oh no, it's actually really nice to hold and write with, to be honest. It's actually surprisingly nice to do these things with. It might not feel that way, but it is. It is a pretty nice pen to handle. That will tell you that much. Uh, damn. So many people streaming right now. Okay. What is Orban? Orban actually didn't do anything himself. It's more what the members of his party did. We're gonna go into this. Um, and as I've said, saying that it's giving it back to Austria is technically speaking not entirely correct. But yes. Let me see. Let me see, okay? Uh, I have to look through the names. I have my notes here somewhere. And by notes, I mean... What happened here? Huh? So, I need the names. There might be an inspired way to sort it out. Archduke Ferdinand Orban. My current plan of getting rid of Orban is to find a magic lamp to make him crap himself on stage. Hello, sorry for bothering you. I want to offer a promotion. Oh my god. Jesus. A bot, of course. Thank you. Bot person. Oh, Jesus. Also, there's strong revanches on the Hungarian right. Like, they have a similar relation to Romania than Austria has to Slovenia, for example. So they aren't exactly opponents in that kind of extreme right fantasy. Okay. So there's been a big scandal in Hungary. One that potentially could have, still potentially might lead to a shakeup, to sort of weakening the foundation of the Orban regime itself. And that is the controversy, the scandal of Novak Katalin, the president, or should I say, the former president of Hungary, who, as we all know or may not know, has caught the anger of the Hungarian people because, as it turned out, the president, former president now, of the Fidesz party, the party that prides itself on being pro-family, anti-degeneracy, quote unquote, anti-pedophilia, and of course, anti-LGBT. And I think it goes without saying that the party, among other things, does the by now classic thing of linking anti-LGBT sentiment with pedophilia and accusations of pedophilia. So what a shock to the system and to the loyal Fidesz voters who hate nothing more than pedophilia. That the very president that they voted for has pardoned a convicted pedophile. It has caused, of course, protests, which, interestingly enough, included Fidesz voters. I think so. I don't know. It's okay. I'm gonna pronounce it like this because Karasu is not here to correct me. Fidesz does not sound as cool as Fidesz, okay? And it has led to a lot of speculation, of course, on what would happen. We were all wondering if it would possibly lead to bigger protests, if it would lead to people becoming disillusioned with the party itself, to sort of look very suspiciously at Orban, who has claimed to be for all these values while basically betraying them all for what happened. It felt like Orban's own response would be pretty lackluster, which was to change the law in the way that would not able in the future for presidents to pardon pedophiles. And of course, the new legislation about protecting children, which we all suspected would, at least in some part, target the LGBT. But it seems like surface level gestures were not enough, and that the party of Fidesz needed a scapegoat, and it got exactly two scapegoats. Two scapegoats were selected for resigning from their positions in order to save the face of the party and allow the status quo to be preserved and the good name of the pro family man Orban to be intact. Those people are, of course, Novak Katalin, the president in question who has been doing the pardoning, who has since given various statements about the whole thing and officially resigned from her position. But there's one more person who has resigned from public life, and that is Varga Judit, the ex Minister of Justice, who has been part of the parliament, who has resigned from her post. What thing? Oh god, I have a thing on screen. What is this even? What was that even? And so that resignation, that particular resignation, is dictated by the fact that Varga Judit, the ex Minister of Justice, has been the actual person pushing for the pardoning of the convicted pedophile. And apparently, the pushing had happened still when the person was the Minister of Justice, which adds weight to the whole thing. The question now remains, the thing still seems to be ongoing, whether or not this sort of act of choosing a scapegoat to resign be enough to end the whole matter and appease the angry people of Hungary? Or will it actually be not enough? Will people protest further? Will people demand more accountability from the party as a whole? Will people actually question Orban's claim of being the pro-family politician, the pro-children politician, that remains to be seen. But we'll see. We will see how this whole thing will develop. And we will do a follow-up in the future. For now, I am hoping that you are happy with this small recap of what's been going on in Hungary. It's been a very difficult time, which hopefully could lead to something good. But it's a very disgusting affair across the board. A lot of bad things are happening across the board. Any thoughts? Is any of this new to you, or is any of this new to you, or did you actually already know all that? Is that something that you already knew, or conservatives are against sexual minorities because they are less likely to harm children? The largest statistical danger to children are cis-het men and pedocons. Unconditionally love those. They are especially like priests. Hmm. So I guess we're done with this segment for now. We've done we didn't really need to read any articles on that because there was like a small recap of what's going on. If you've enjoyed it, then as always, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell, do all the things that nice people do when they enjoy a content. They press them bells and hit them comments and do all that other thing. I'm thinking of getting back into Blender animation. Do you know the 12 principles of animation? Are you familiar with the 12 principles of animation? A big thing that any animator, be it traditional, be it 3D, any type of animator, must be familiar with the 12 principles of animation, at least in passing. The half-ironic joke aside, it's like a coin flip whether a conservative has abused children or women, and it's a neat certainty that they support some form of such abuse. I am familiar with nothing. Well, then how can you go back to Blender animation if you don't know the 12 principles of animation? No. Do we have to look into the 12 principles of animation now? Is that a thing that I need to do a whole segment on now? It seems that way. It seems like the audience needs a whole segment of on the 12 principles of animation, which I'm of course always more than happy to oblige. Hold on. Let's go to the Ptasie Mleczko thing. What's up? Where is the... Why isn't the Ptasie Mleczko showing? moment. I'm trying to do a react and I cannot. I have to fix it. There we go. Fixed. One moment. I have to do this one off screen. 12 rules of animation. Here we go. And away we go. "12 rules of animation." It's a thing you need to learn. 12 Principles of Animation, official full series. One moment. We're gonna do it like this. We're gonna learn from the best. I hope we can learn from the best. I hope there's a video by this person. Oh, please, let there be. Let there be. Okay, never mind. There's. So disappointed. Let's go.
Hey guys, so
let's just go with this. We're gonna learn from this as much as possible.
I decided to make a video series dedicated to the 12 principles of animation, as described by the legendary animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So the first principle
Damn. The legends themselves are speaking to us through this person.
Is squash and stretch. This is the principle that animated objects will get longer or flatter to emphasize their speed, momentum, weight, and mass.
Interestingly enough, this is a thing that actually, when you slow down objects, really slow down objects on video, you will actually see this principle in action in real life when it comes to certain objects that feel very solid. You will see that in certain situations and motion, it almost feels like they stretch or squash, especially when there's impact involved. There seems to be like this stretch and squash effect happening with animation.
Here's a bouncing ball that has squash and stretch. And here is one without squash and stretch.
It feels
See
more
the difference?
Yes, it feels more stiff.
The amount that
there's more life to movement when you implement squash and stretch. It feels more. It feels less artificial. That is, I guess, the term that I would use. The movement feels far less artificial, robotic.
Object squashes and stretches says something about its mass.
That's right, that's also true. Less squashy and stretchy objects can feel heavier.
The more squash
and sort of massive
and stretch, the softer the object. The less squash and stretch, the stiffer the object.
And the stiffer the movement while we're at it. I have fixed it, haven't I? Haven't I fixed it? Oh crap. I have fixed it. What's wrong with the crop of my on my camera? Oh. What's wrong with the crop? Oh, it moved. Sorry. Camera moved. There we go.
This first one looks like a water balloon, and this
No. No, you're incorrect, Kitani. God, do I have to do this now? Because people just don't know anything about life. There is no motion blur. You're mistaken. It's not. That is not what's happening. Okay. Now I have to do this because people are skeptical.
A baseball bat is one tough item, but how tough? What really happens when bat meets ball?
I'm gonna.
And why does the
I'm gonna
bat
look
they
for
all
the
play
exact
uses Lowell
slow motion thing.
Hardball is actually 1,000 frames.
There we go. That's the video that I want. Probably. We'll see. Okay. There we go. A ball that is hitting a thing in very slow motion.
Per second, we can see the
Squash.
regulation hardballs turn into squash.
Stretch. Stretch. So again.
At 10,000 frames per second, we can see the
Squash.
regulation hardballs.
Stretch. There is no motion blur. There's actual squashing and stretching out happening physically. There's actual squashing of the object happening. So, yes. It's not a matter of motion blur. My goodness. Yeah. But it doesn't change the fact that the visual thing is happening. And that the squash and stretch to an extent is exaggerating and sort of recreating that. Because as we will learn later, one of the other principles of animation is exaggeration. Well, it would also it would also bounce off of the wooden wall differently, so that's a whole different matter, which you would also want to recreate from in animation, by the way. If you're a good animator, you would take that into account, that the type of surface that you're bouncing is from. That happens with solid objects as well. It's not just because the baseball is squishy.
the second one.
Also, in animation, not everything stretches and squashes as well. Just so you know. So I think you need to listen to this part again.
Squash and stretch out its mass.
I think you need to listen to this again.
The amount that an object squashes and stretches says something about its mass. The more squash and stretch, the softer the object. The less squash and stretch, the stiffer the object.
So yes. There you go.
This first one looks like a water balloon, and the second one probably would be a bowling ball. Squash and stretch applies to characters too. Look at how this figure is stretching from the speed that he's coming down with, and then he squashes after he lands before settling in his pose. You can also use squash and stretch to exaggerate facial expressions. Let's add some squash and stretch.
Also, you can do that with traditional animation with cars, but that's an artistic choice, so that's a whole different matter. That is while that is a choice, a stylistic choice that you can make, it doesn't undermine the principle.
Stretch to this face. When his eyes are closed, his face is squashed, and when he opens his eyes in disbelief, his face stretches up and settles back to normal. It's very important to keep the volume of the object consistent. This is what a lot of people mess up with when they're first trying to do squash and stretch. They'll elongate.
Oh, it is very much about mass. You are mistaken. The person is using very proper words. Trust me. A person is using very proper words. Because it's not just about docility and elasticity. It is also about the mass of the object. Because the less stretch and squash you will have, the more massive the thing will feel in movement. I'll demonstrate. I will demonstrate this. I want to see some well done ball. There we go. I think this is a good example. Yeah, but it's not just about hardness. I don't think you understand. I think you don't understand what is being said. Mass is the total amount of matter or stuff in an object, as written by Google, the great scholar. Okay, mass is the total amount of matter, stuff. It's not just about hardness. If you think it's about hardness, then you've missed the point of what the person is saying. It's not about hardness. That is true. Although now you're mistaking weight with mass yourself. Now you're speaking of weight, not of mass. Kilogram is a measure of weight, not of mass. Well, those principles. That is very correct. What do you mean? We're googling the physics, my poorest subject. I guess you're right. I shouldn't speak on physics ever again. Well, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. I hope. I hope you know what I mean.
Elongate the ball
Oh wait, I have to go back to reaction.
like this and flatten it like this. This is what you should not do. The overall volume of the ball must be the same. So as the ball gets longer, it also gets narrower. When it gets flatter, it also gets wider. The same goes with cubes. If you're going in with one line, the other lines must go in the opposite direction. The cube should start out narrow, get flat.
But my point stands that the animation is supposed to copy this squashiness of objects that are squashy and stretchy. So, at the end of the day, my point stands about the principle itself.
Get narrow again, and then rest. In-betweening with cubes is easy because you can measure the line in between the two lines and then connect them to make the cube. If you master squash and stretch with cubes, the next step is to try to do it in 3D. Another important note is that the ball does not have to be stretching the entire time that it's falling. When it's just starting to fall, it should have its normal shape for the most part. And then when it's just about to hit the bottom, that's when it has the most stretch. So do not overdo squash and stretch in this sense. Alright, the second principle of animation is
Yeah, true.
is called anticipation. This is when
Oh,
a
anticipation.
character prepares for an action to give the audience a clue as to what is happening next, as well as to make the action appear more realistic. One example is when a character is about to jump. Before leaping into the air, he has to prepare for the action by crouching down to build energy. It's like a spring that coils up before releasing. Look at this character jumping without any anticipation. It looks very unrealistic because the energy to jump comes out of nowhere. Here's another example, a punch. To add power to the punch and communicate to the viewers that he is about to punch, he reaches his arm back and then punches. By contrast, having no anticipation results in a very weak punch. You'll see this in a lot of cartoons. Before running, a character will wind up before taking off. In the previous video about
Oh, sorry. I don't really fight people. I lose fights. What was I? Yeah, anticipation. That's a big one. Anticipation. You could say it like, you could call it like this. I mean, it was explained pretty well here. It was explained pretty well here. The thing that you do before performing an action.
squash and stretch, this face actually uses
It's like when you do the before sneezing. It would look weird if you didn't, if you just sneezed out of the blue without doing the whole, the thing before sneezing.
anticipation as well. Instead of immediately stretching up, the face squashes first to anticipate the stretch and give it more power. Anticipation helps communicate actions to the audience by preparing them for the next action.
Right.
This can happen in many ways. If a character is about to take something out of their pocket, they make their hand very visible and up in the air before going into the pocket. Otherwise, the audience might miss it and wonder how they got that object in the first place. The most important thing is that the viewer notices the hand and the pocket, so the character cannot be performing any competing actions. Let's say that something's about to happen on the right. A character may prepare for that action by pointing their eyes and head to look in that direction, leading the viewers to also look there. It's important to make it as easy as possible for the audience to understand what's going on without having to watch it twice. But this can also be used to trick the audience too, if you lead their eyes in one direction and then surprise them by having something happen on the other side of the screen. Taking anticipation a step further, you can actually have multiple levels of anticipation. Let's go back to our punch animation, where the character winds up before punching. This animation has one level of anticipation. Now look at this one. The character is actually winding up for his wind-up by going forward, then winding up, and then before punching, he throws his other arm back to further anticipate the punch. This punch is very complex. It's actually similar to what a baseball pitcher does when he's getting ready to throw the ball. So the third principle of animation is called staging.
Staging.
Staging is the presentation of any idea so that it is completely and unmistakably clear. This is a very broad principle because it covers so many areas of animation. It can apply to acting, timing, camera angle and position, and setting. So when you're animating, you want to be in full control of where the audience is looking. You're essentially saying, look at this, now look at this, and now look at this. This control is achieved through staging. All of the elements of the scene work together to move the viewer's eyes around the screen. Here's an example of bad staging. The characters are competing for stage presence, so the viewer doesn't know which one to look at.
Right.
The camera has a lot to do with this. It's important to know when to be close.
This is a pretty good explanation of the concept of staging.
Close up and when to be far away. Far away is good for big actions, while close up is good for expressions. Don't have the main action be off to the side. It should be either in the center of the screen or in one of the thirds of the screen. If they're facing to the side, there should be more empty space in the direction that they're facing, unless someone's sneaking up behind them, in which case they would no longer be the main character of the shot. The main action of the scene should be very clear and simple. It can't be upstaged by other things that are going on. This takes attention away from the main point. It should also have proper timing. Let one action finish before the other person starts their action, instead of overlapping them. Sometimes you need to insert pauses if there's
Overlapping can actually have a good effect if you know what you're doing, but that's, I guess every rule has a has moments when you can break them and get good results. But I think overlapping can work if you do it intentionally and you know what you're doing.
Something on screen that needs to be processed by the viewer before moving on. Sometimes if there's any text on the screen, you should keep it on screen for as long as it takes to read it out loud 3 times. But it's not just about controlling the viewer's eyes, it's also about conveying ideas. If a character is sad, for example, you want to make sure that the viewer knows that and feels that. If someone's house is supposed to be very poor and decrepit, go over the top to make sure that they get it. And don't have any objects that
Which is interesting because that's another separate rule of animation. Exaggeration. Exaggeration is a rule of animation on its own, outside of staging.
detract from that purpose. Let's take this scene and give it the staging treatment. This fat guy is eating pizza. The idea that we want to convey is that he is a severe overeater. So let's set the stage more. Let's give him more pizza and put piles of pizza boxes behind him and stains on his shirt. Let's move the camera down below him to make him look bigger. And let's change his acting so that his
Damn. Stereotyping a bit, aren't we? If someone eats a lot, they have to be a slob and they have to not care if they get dirty. Damn, that's... The author of the video is betraying some of the beliefs that he holds. I have to say I'm not very pleased with this. Why is the stain necessary? Not good.
weight actually gets in the way of his eating, so he can't even reach for the soda without falling over. Now let's make sure
I
to
made
time
a think of fatphobia a bit unironically.
it right so he
It is a bit fatphobic unironically.
notices the soda and then reaches for it. Now the idea is very clear. Alright,
Yeah, the idea that you're a bit of a bigot.
so the fourth animation principle is called straight ahead and pose to pose. This term describes 2 methods used to animate drawings. The first method, straight ahead, is where you draw the first drawing, and then you draw the second drawing, and then the third drawing, and so on. It's basically animating as you...
I really like the straight ahead method, by the way, but it's very easy to lose volume, but it's also creates very interesting results.
go. The second method, pose to pose, is where you draw the beginning and end of each main pose and go back later to fill in the drawings in between. So there are benefits to both methods. Pose to pose is generally better for most actions because it gives you the most control. You have a good idea of what the action is going to look like very early in the process. So instead of worrying if the character is going to end up in the right place, you decide where they end up from the beginning and work backwards. Also, using straight ahead animation can lead to the character changing size or being on a different level from beginning to end. Pose to pose can save you a lot of work. If you were to animate a whole sequence straight ahead and then realize that one pose is off, you would have to change several drawings to fix that one pose. But with pose to pose,
Straight ahead gives you bigger fluidity on the other hand, and is very great to, for example, animate hair flowing or a fire that sort of burns. This is great to do with straight ahead animation.
you do the main poses to see if it feels right, and you can catch problems early on. Straight ahead animation, on the other hand, is good for animation that is unpredictable.
There we
Some
go.
examples of this include fire, water particles, clouds of dust, explosions. The reason why straight ahead works well is because there are laws of physics that work at a constant rate, and it's hard to predict how it will work pose to pose. So when animating fire, for example, you just go with the flow based on what you know about fire, and let the fire kind of create itself. If we were to look at the beginning and end, we wouldn't even know how to in between it. However, you can still use pose to pose to make the general shapes, and fill it in between to make it smoother. Another example of unpredictable animation is overlapping action, which will be covered in depth in the next video. Let's say that a character has floppy ears. You could draw the figure with his ears for each pose, and just draw the in-betweens accordingly, but another method is to animate the figure using pose to pose without the ears, and then going through and adding the ears using straight ahead. This is good because you can focus on the figure's movements without the distraction of having to
And in software, you can just do it on separate layers, usually.
do his ears, and you can also focus on the physics of his ears without the distraction of his body's movement. This also applies to hair, tails, and other appendages. When you work pose to pose, there's some vocabulary that goes into it. There are main poses called keys, secondary poses called extremes, and further broken down poses called breakdowns.
And then the in-betweens, of course.
Make the keys first, perfect them, then decide the farthest the character will go in each direction using extremes, and then decide how you want the extremes to connect using breakdown poses. At this point, you can start in-betweening. Working with this sort of hierarchy will give you the most control, as opposed to doing your pose-to-pose straight ahead, so to speak. This is like pose-to-pose within pose-to-pose, because you are perfecting the poses at each level before moving down to the next level. Alright, so the next principle of animation is called follow-through and overlapping action. This is the technique of having body parts and appendages drag behind the rest of the body and continue to move when the body stops. Follow-through and overlapping action are often associated.
It's used to create the feeling that the movement is not stopping abruptly as if you've hit pause. If you have something like stop and then a piece of clothing move a little bit, for example, then you'll have this natural effect of saying that the movement did not just abruptly stop across the board as if someone pushed pause on life.
With another technique called drag. These names all describe the same thing but in different ways. For example, follow-through refers to the way parts of the body continue to move after the body is stopped. Overlapping action describes the offset between the timing of the main body and its other parts. Drag describes the technique of delaying the movement of body parts in relation to the main body. All three of these are basically describing different aspects of the same thing. Follow-through and overlapping action add a great deal of realism to a character. Here's a character with and without follow-through and overlapping action. Basically, when the main body moves, the tip of the appendage should be the last to catch up, and when the body stops, the tip should follow through the farthest before settling back. This is true of not just appendages, but the whole body as well. When coming to a stop, often the body will follow through and then come back. Just as a character needs to anticipate his jump, he also needs to follow through his land. Sometimes the extra skin on a character can be treated as a separate entity with drag and follow through. Similar to squash and stretch, the amount of drag that you give something says something about its mass. The first one is like a TV antenna, while the second one is like a feather. It's usually easier to add the appendages after the animation of the main body is finished. When adding hair, for example, use the previous frame as an indicator of where the hair should be
We're
stretched
not discussing mass again.
towards. Since it has drag, it should be dragging from where it was in the last frame. In addition, make sure to let the hair follow through when the body comes to a stop. Arms are a good place to insert follow through and overlapping action.
This is a bit different actually. This example. Let me see the example. Interestingly enough, this is actually an example of a great example of the so-called joint breaking. See? I hope this will be explained in this video, but as you can see, the hand over here do you see how the hand sort of twists in a way that is impossible to twist in real life? You cannot bend this. You cannot bend your hand like this. You cannot like break your hand like your hand cannot break like this, and it adds an elastic effect to the whole movement. It's called joint breaking, and that's a principle of animation. Sorry.
action. Have the elbows lead the arm's actions. The elbow comes
See?
first, followed by the forearm, and then the hand. This is true even when walking. The forearms drag slightly behind the elbows, and the hands drag slightly behind the forearms. Overlapping action helps to break up an animation to make it more interesting. If we offset the movement of the arms and legs, the animation appears more graceful. If a character is standing up from the ground, we could offset the top half from the bottom half to make it look less easy and more realistic. Alright, so the next principle is called slow in and slow out.
This is a very important one.
This principle refers to the way pretty much all movement starts slowly, builds speed, and finishes slowly. This is one of the most important principles to achieving lifelike motion. Without slow in and slow out, things feel mechanical. That's because robots are one of the only things that actually move their parts at a constant speed. To use this principle in 2D animation, you take your extreme poses, draw a single in-between, and then draw
There's of course more to this than just robotic versus non-robotic. There's also, through this principle, you can control how fast or slow certain movements feel, or for example, how slow or fast certain characters feel when they run. Even though they run in with the same speed in the same amount of time, you can make them feel faster or slower through using this.
Between those, then only in between the drawing.
Like characters in a game, for example, can run at the same speed in reality, but through the use of this principle of animation, you can make a heavier character seem to move slower, even though they sort of travel the same amount of distance within the exact same time as the quicker character, quote unquote.
Drawings closest to the extremes until you're satisfied with the amount of slow in and slow out. With 3D animation and motion graphics, adding slow in and slow out is a matter of changing the motion curves from linear to spline by adjusting the Bezier handles. As time progresses, the object starts slow, gets fast, and ends slowly. Use it wisely. For example, you wouldn't add a slow out to a bouncing ball as it's colliding with the ground.
As you can see this here.
Then only in between the drawings
This
closest
is like timing and spacing.
to the extremes until you're satisfied with the amount of slow in and slow out. With 3D animation,
Keep in mind, the timing here, the time that takes to go from here to here is the same. You just change the spacing of the frames. And the tempo feels different. See? Look.
and motion graphics, adding slow in and slow out is a matter of changing the motion curves from linear to spline by adjusting the Bezier handles. As time progresses, the object starts slow, gets fast, and ends slowly. Use it wisely. For example, you wouldn't add a slow out to a bouncing ball as it's colliding with the ground, but you would add it as it's bouncing back up. You wouldn't add it to a bullet coming out of a gun, but you would add it as the gun comes up due to whiplash. Using this principle can allow you to only have to draw one in-between if the motion is quick enough. Draw one in-between and then add another frame on either end with the drawing slightly skewed in the correct direction, and then it's done. Sometimes you don't even have
That looks so stiff.
to add the one in-between.
That looks so
This kind of
stiff.
motion can be achieved in 3D with very extreme curves. Many people starting out with animation get impatient and draw the next frame very far away from the beginning. It's very unrealistic for a character to go from completely still to super fast, so adding a few drawings to ease into it will fix the problem. A good way to fix a choppy animation is to analyze the space between the drawings. They should be evenly spaced, with drawings closer together at the beginning of the action and at the end of the action, and drawings farther apart in the middle. Alright, the seventh principle of animation is called arcs. So very few organisms are capable
Oh yeah, arcs moving in circles.
of movements that have a mechanical in and out or up and down precision. Most living creatures will move in a circular path, otherwise known as an arc. So let's say that we were given these key poses and were told to fill in the poses in between. Simply taking the midway point between the poses will not work, because this looks way too mechanical. The ball needs to follow an arc. Of course, we also need to consider the slow in and out caused by gravity. When doing this in 3D and motion graphics, we can achieve this effect by keeping the movement in the x-axis constant, but giving the movement in the y-axis a slow in and slow out. This will give the ball its arc. Now let's look at this head turn. Right now it looks pretty dull and straight, but if we add an arc to it, it gives it a little bit more character. Forgetting about arcs can lead to some obvious mistakes. For example, we may in-between this movement by calculating the midpoint like this and cause the shape of the object to shrink. If we were to draw a simple arc as reference, then this movement would be a lot easier and more realistic. Arcs can be added to almost any figure movement. This guy is landing on the ground. Let's have his body settle in an arc. This guy is reacting with shock. Let's have his body
Of course, there are, again, examples that sort of defy that. You don't use an arc if you want like a powerful straight sort of action, like a bullet just shoots forward. It doesn't go in an arc. A punch goes forward. It doesn't go in an arc. It's fast and powerful.
arms follow an arc. This guy is taking a step. Have his body move down and up in an arc before he even takes his next step. This guy is kicking. Have his leg and body follow through in an arc. When movements are very fast, you can add arcs in the form of a smear. Take the beginning and end pose and draw an arc in between and fill it in the same color as the object, maybe slightly transparent or fragmented towards the end of the action. Okay, the next principle is called secondary action. This principle is often associated with overlapping action, although according to Frank and Ollie, it means something very different.
Right. It means, for example, an example of secondary action would be me explaining something to you and moving my hand. And, for example, playing with my pen at the same time, you know? The pen would be the secondary action here. Me playing with the pen. That would be an example of the secondary action. You know?
Secondary action describes gestures that support the main action to add more dimension to the character animation. For example, a character may be walking angrily. The primary action is the legs, and the second
Irrelevant, the bullet dropping arcs, because we're just talking about the shooting, not about the dropping. So that's, your fedora tipping is irrelevant. There you go.
secondary action is everything else. The arms swinging, the head bobbing, and the facial movements. Let's say a character is
Especially if the arrow actually hits something and not just drops. Boom. Got him.
about to knock on a door. The secondary action of the other hand will communicate what kind of door knocking this is. If it's a fist, it makes him look angry. If it's dainty, it gives him a graceful, happy vibe.
Jesus.
If it's tucked close while the head looks back and forth before knocking, it communicates that he doesn't want to be discovered. This guy is picking up a box. We can give him more personality by having him rub his hands together and twiddle them in the air while getting ready to pick it up. It's important not to let the secondary action dominate the primary action.
Yeah.
If a figure has a sad expression that should be seen, and we are adding a secondary action of wiping away a tear, the hand shouldn't cover the face. On the other hand, don't let it go unnoticed. People might not even notice that there's a tear there unless you give it its own time. This is why the principle of staging is very important in secondary action. So let's take this simple bite animation and give it some secondary action. First, let's make him lick his lips to show that he's hungry. Next, let's make him close his eyes and have his eyebrows go up, showing that he likes it. Last, let's make him shake his head because he cannot believe how good it tastes. The primary action is the bite, but all the secondary actions add more dimension to the bite. So the next principle is called timing. This principle states that the personality and nature of an animation is greatly affected by the number of frames inserted between each main action. Basically, if you have many drawings that are very close together in between the two main poses, the action will be very slow. If you have very few drawings set far apart from each other, the action will be very fast. Less drawings means fast, more drawings means slow. One simple action can have 10 different meanings,
Even though the time can be the same between, you know.
depending on how many
So
frames
the slowness and the fastness is only perceived. That's a really key thing in this.
you give it. This man is leaning from one shoulder to the other. With no in-betweens, it looks like his head is being hit by a tremendous force, nearly snapping off his neck. With one in-between, his head has been hit by a rolling pin or some other object. With two in-betweens, he has a muscle twitch. With three in-betweens, he's dodging the rolling pin or the other object. With four, he's saying, "Move it, get out of here." With five, he's more friendly, saying, "Over here, come on, hurry." With six, he sees the good-looking girl or the sports car he always wanted. With seven, he's trying to get a better look at something. With eight, he's searching for the peanut butter on the kitchen shelf. With nine, he is appraising something very thoughtfully. And with 10 in-betweens, he is stretching a sore muscle. The standard frame rate for movies is 24 frames per second. If one drawing is made for each frame, 24 drawings per second, that is called drawing on ones. If one drawing is made for every 2 frames, that's called drawing on
And
twos.
so on.
And every 3 drawings is threes, and so on. It's actually very common to draw on twos rather than ones for a few reasons. First, it cuts the amount of work in half. Second, it actually makes slow actions look smoother than if you were to draw every frame, because the precision needed to draw in between 2 very close drawings can lead to the animation looking jittery. Some would also say that drawing on twos is better for fast actions as well, because it gives a sparkle and spirit to the animation that would otherwise be too evenly timed and less lively if it were drawn on ones. But drawing on ones is necessary when there's a very fast action that needs to be read, often a scramble or a flurry of activity. And it's also everyone's choice how many drawings to put in between poses. Some people draw more or less frames depending on how much movement there is, and this can give a very dynamic effect to the animation. So the next principle is called exaggeration. Basically, every action,
go.
pose, and expression can
We got to the exaggeration, finally.
be taken to the next level to increase the amount of impact on the viewer. So the early animators at Disney would get confused because Walt would tell them to add more realism, but then when they changed it, he would criticize the result because it wasn't exaggerated enough. In Walt's mind, there was probably no difference. Making it more realistic didn't mean make the physics and proportions more consistent with reality, but rather make the idea or essence of the action more apparent and real. So if a character was
So in other words, what he meant is don't make it realistic, because interestingly enough, when you try to make it actually realistic in animation, it feels stiff and not realistic. So when you say make it more realistic, what it basically means, make it feel more realistic, not make it actually more realistic, if that makes sense. That's why the exaggeration works. That's why simply rotoscoping movements can lead to very bad results.
was sad,
Sort of. He did sort of. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
make him
Before.
sadder. Bright, make him brighter. Worried, make him more worried. Wild, make him wilder. Exaggeration doesn't mean more distorted, but more convincing. It's amazing how you can always add exaggeration. This animation looks finished, right? But let's give it some exaggeration. Now when we compare the two, the first one definitely looks less powerful, even though earlier we thought it was finished. When motions are quick, the exaggeration needs to be bigger in order to be noticed.
Well, a part of it is that there are many sort of little movements in reality that we perceive but don't necessarily catch when we just rotoscope. And that creates the uncanny valley because we don't see the small stuff that we perceive happening in the animation.
This still
So it
frame
feels
looks
stiff.
way too extreme to be realistic, but when you play it in
And
motion,
that is why we use exaggeration.
it looks less extreme. That's because a lot of the frames that your eye perceives in a short time are less extreme frames, and only one of them is very extreme. So in order to boost its presence, you can either make it stay on screen longer or make it more extreme. Since it's hard to tell how much room you have for exaggeration, a good rule to follow is to push the exaggeration level until it actually becomes too much. Then wind it back until you're satisfied with it. This way you see the whole range beforehand instead of shooting in the dark. So the next principle is called solid drawing. This principle is about making sure that forms feel like they are in three-dimensional space with volume, weight, and balance. One thing that makes animating a lot easier is being able to draw a figure from all angles. This requires knowledge of three-dimensional drawing. For example, when drawing a line on a sphere, it must follow the contour of the sphere's surface. A straight line instantly makes the circle look flat. When drawing cubes, avoid making parallel lines. Lines should be bent towards the vanishing point, otherwise it will look like a flat symbol or a logo. When doing a rough pass of the character, use basic solid shapes like spheres, cubes, and cylinders to construct the character, instead of circles, squares, and rectangles. This will help you be mindful of the space they're in. Another thing you can do is draw perspective lines on the ground to keep track of their distance from the camera, so that you can know when to draw them bigger or smaller. When moving on to the clean line version of your character, be very mindful of overlap, and try to include it whenever possible. Without overlap, everything appears to be on the same plane, but just adding a single line here and there can define where surfaces come out and where they recede. Another thing to note when doing lines is to avoid symmetry. Symmetrical lines look flat. Try to pair a straight line with a curved line, or offset two curved lines, so it looks more natural and dynamic. The principle of solid drawing applies to 3D animation as well, in regards to portraying weight and balance in the pose of a character. For example, avoid what's called twinning, which happens when the arms and legs and other paired features are doing the exact same thing. This is a known affliction that animators have to make a conscious effort to avoid. Instead, lean it over to one side, or put one hand on the hips, or give it a slouch, or do something to show that it has weight and has to keep its balance in a 3D environment. Alright, the last principle of animation is called appeal. Basically, characters that you animate should be somewhat pleasing to look at. they should have some kind of charismatic aspect to like about them. This doesn't only apply to the hero of the story, but also the villain and every other character. Appeal doesn't always mean good looking, it can also mean interesting. So the villain should be likable in the sense that they are interesting to look at. The tricky thing about this is that everyone has a different standard for what is appealing. However, just giving your character a dynamic design can greatly boost its appeal. Here are 3 steps to doing that. First, use a variety of shapes. Instead of using the same shape for every character, try out different shapes, because there's no limit to the spectrum of crazy configurations that characters can have. Every good character design starts with a clear shape. Second, play with proportions. Cartoonists often magnify the things we find interesting and shrink the things we might find ugly or boring. For example, they might enlarge the head and eyes, shrink the body, and make the hands larger. Finding the aspect of a character that defines his or her personality and blowing it up can often create a more appealing design. Third, keep it simple. Too much information can overcomplicate the character and also make it harder.
Oh my god. I wanted to avoid that thing, but I guess this person is sort of like, I don't know. This person follows me. We know about your folder. We know about it.
And more restraining to animate. This is a difference between drawing for illustration and drawing for animation. With animated characters, you have to pick and choose what details to keep because you're going to be drawing those details hundreds of times. So let's give some characters an appeal makeover. This king has a generic shape and not much personality. Let's make him more like an egg. Now his appeal comes from looking proud, powerful, and petite. This robot mercenary has too many details to see any personality. Let's pick a few details and emphasize them, remove the rest, and change his shape. Now he has a mysterious appeal to him. This fisherman looks pretty average. Let's adjust his proportions to emphasize his lankiness and make that his point of appeal. So that's all I've got for appeal, and that brings us to the end of our 12-part series. So I thank you for watching it. I had a lot of fun making it, and I actually...
How is this a series? It's a single video. How do you call a single video a series? Now that is using, like, not very specific language.
Learned a lot about animation too. I do plan to continue making these videos, and next I will be covering walk and run cycles. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Oh my god, what was that? Jump scare. But yes. But yes. Next. What do I... Oh yeah. So now we can go back to politics. Now that I've heard... Now that... Oh my god. Now that I've helped fake Alec Kyle Parker. I mean, my favorite animation person is Richard Williams, of course. You know who Richard Williams is? I hope the stream won't get butchered. It's short, so I guess I'll show you just a bit. Do you know who Richard Williams is? I sure hope anybody here knows who Richard Williams is.
Charlie was good. He was a good guy, but Charlie didn't like. Charlie would do, I'll do it in color, just to make it clear. Charlie would do a nice little drawing right in the middle between 1 and 3, the eyeballs, see? Charlie liked eyeballs that were like this. So for about 30 seconds of material, when it came out, you had the eyes on the screen doing this. Everything else was going, hello there, and it's going...
That is when you get a bad in-betweener. So Richard Williams is the director of the animation for the famous movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The super famous animator. one of the biggest legends when it comes to animation, and the creator of the best animation course ever created, in my opinion, the Animator's Survival Kit, which is a book and an even better course on animation, which is the Animator's Survival Kit Animated. So, if you really like animation and if you would like to try your hand at animation, you missed me being bad at physics. So, if you want to sort of try your hand at animation, I highly recommend uh, getting your hands on the Animator's Survival Kit Animated. It's a really good course. It'll teach you everything you need to know about animation from beginning to end. I'm probably going to revisit that whole thing in the preparation of the thing that I want to produce. Wait, you've already been to the Super Bowl dinner? And you've already returned? I guess the Super Bowl really is not a huge event for you, is it? Is it? Oh, you're here, you're eating. Okay, let's go back to the thing. So, as you know, as I've said many, many times before, what ball? What's in what ball? Oh, Super Bowl. Oh, oh my god. Oh, okay. Boomer jokes. Really? On this stream? Boomer jokes? Are you a father by any chance? Do you have children? I'm starting to suspect you have children. Okay, let us continue. We're cats. We abandon all our children. Cats don't abandon their children unless they're unhealthy. I know. I've had cats give birth at my house, and I had to take care of cats from birth. Cats only quote unquote abandon their little kitties when they grow up. They don't just abandon kittens. Normally, under normal circumstances, cats don't abandon their children. Who? So, as we know, the grand old party is a party of the devil. We've established this many times. And we've established that their granddaddy, Trump, I guess, is, as of now, the devil himself. Because the amount of the super questionable things that he has been doing and saying has been ramping up in a pretty extraordinary fashion. So, as of very, very recently, Mr. Donald Trump has said that if he becomes president, which should all hope will not come to pass, he will abandon, quote unquote, any NATO state that does not pay enough. I think we're gonna get a statement on that. He will encourage Russia. I'm sorry. Oh no, wait, never mind. He actually did not say that. He said that he would encourage Russia to just attack any country too that does not pay enough.
Now let's go to.
Let's see. I want to see the statement. There we go. The statement itself. Just don't kill the stream or whatever. Don't kill the stream. React.
NATO was busted until I came along. I said, everybody's going to pay. They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer. They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to.
So yeah, Donald Trump and his vision of how international alliances should work. Which terms would you like me to elaborate on? It's a military alliance, basically, of countries that agree to mutually cooperate, sort of defend themselves. It was basically an anti-USSR thing, a defensive alliance. Like this is our Donald. Wonder why people don't like him. Don't like him? There's a risk that he'll become president again. I wish people didn't like him. But for some weird reason, people seem to like him. If people didn't like him, they wouldn't vote for him. What is wrong with you, America? What is wrong with you, US? I cannot believe this. A guy in the US can come out and say something like that, and there's an actual risk that he'll become president because people vote for him. Just crazy, crazy guy. He also wants to just close the border because that's the most rational border policy. Just closing the border altogether. The US fits into it by being a member. Yeah, of course, US is a member. Of course. One of the things I'm pretty sure Trump also floated around was the idea of the US leaving NATO. So, yes, it is a member. A lot of conspiracy theorists claim that actually the US runs NATO. The US owns and runs NATO. Will the US even survive another Trump presidency? I don't know. None of us will survive. Russia will just conquer all of us and kill all of us, the US will go to hell. It's all good. It's all fine. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay after all. Every end marks a new beginning. After all goes to hell, surely some sort of rebuilding will happen. So it's okay. Don't worry. Even if humanity ends, some new species will emerge. Don't worry. It will all be fine. It will all be fine in the end. Let's be positive. If humanity ends itself through stupid ideas and stupid people like Trump, then, you know, that's just humanity giving a chance to a new species. So there you go.
Pay your bills.
Well,
Pay your bills. There you go. There you have it. Pay your bills. I'm just gonna say, I'm not gonna be discussing this for long, but I'm just gonna say there is a huge difference. Like when, well, for one, Trump wants the US to leave NATO, but for two, there is a huge difference in the way the US runs NATO, and for example, the USSR run the Warsaw Pact. If you think those are comparable, then you are mistaken. That is all that I'm going to say. Depends on what you think when you say the US runs NATO, because the US is not close to running NATO the way the USSR had run the Warsaw Pact, for example, which was like the supposedly the equivalent during the Soviet bloc times. Where's the... So there you go. Trump. Trump and his brilliant statements. And this guy is your main candidate, one of your main candidates for president. I just cannot believe it. That is... He should have been done after his last term, to be quite honest. He should have been done. But for some reasons, it seems that people in the US just like to vote for people like this. There should be a study on what makes Trump popular among the populace. Loud. Okay. Oh my god. I'm gonna test my volume. I'm gonna test my own volume. Am I quiet to anybody else? Am I quiet to anybody else? Am I not? I'm not. I'm not quiet. I'm loud. Your Super Bowl is. Your Super Bowl is. Your Super Bowl is loud. Jesus. Your Super Bowl is loud. I say. Your Super Bowl is loud. I can hear you. Okay. Okay. All right. We are. The testing is done. Jesus. Trump has already said stuff like that. A Trump supporter thesis would be controversial. Why would it be controversial? I mean, people do want to vote for him. If there's this risk of him becoming president, then I assume there are people willing to vote for him, no? Like, and he already has said things of similar vein before. Do the whole, if you don't pay enough, I'll encourage Russia to do whatever it wants with you. He said that if Europe should be attacked, I'm not sure if, I don't remember if he specified Russia there, that the US should not support Europe at all. That should Taiwan be attacked by China, the US should not do anything to help at all either. So basically, Trump is just trying to undermine any sort of. Trump is just trying to undermine any sort of reliable partner status, any sort of reliable ally status. Who's exactly going to trust the US after this? If it just fails to. If it just decides that it will not. You know, that it doesn't care about any of its allies anymore, which seems increasingly to be the case with Ukraine and the aid. Or is US just going to back to isolationism or something, which in our current world situation would be a very not wise idea. What exactly does Trump think that he's gaining through this sort of rhetoric? Like, do his voters really want to hear that the US does not want to support any of its allies? Is that really the rhetoric that Trump voters really want to hear? We will abandon everyone globally? Is that a big talking point that speaks to the voter base? We'll just abandon and cancel all of our international obligations? And, I don't know, leave our partners, allies in the wind? Jesus. How many... This is... I don't know. I don't know what to say apart from calling it very short-sighted. Very short-sighted indeed. But then again, apparently humans are just built to be short-sighted. So then... I don't know. This is your candidate. This is our candidate for president. Slowly saying, I will allow Russia to do whatever it wants if you don't pay enough, quote unquote. Whatever that actually means to Trump. What a great president. Ex-president. Well, maybe soon to be president, so who knows? Who knows what future awaits us if that happens? We'll see. The battle for aid in Ukraine is still raging on in the US from what I've heard. So that thing is not completely lost. But we'll see. So I guess we're done with this topic. Please no. I mean, he's not a very good businessman because if you're a business, you're not supposed to screw over all your business partners, and that is effectively what Trump wants to do. In business terms, he just wants to abandon all of his business partners, which actually in business terms makes no sense. But then again, as someone has pointed out, Trump is a businessman that is used to going bankrupt, so. So there's that. The bankrupt president. Grain. Oh gosh. Okay, we're jumping ship from the Trump topic. And we're jumping straight into the grain protest thing. So, as you may know, on the Polish-Ukrainian border, farmers are blocking trucks, farmers are protesting, farmers are showing their unhappiness with how regulation treats Ukrainian farmers and Ukrainian drivers in comparison to the European farmers and drivers. That is like the overall theory behind the protest, that Ukrainian farmers and drivers are being given certain exemptions from European Union rules that give them an unfair advantage over farmers and drivers within Europe, which sparks protests, which is a catastrophe. This whole protest is a catastrophe on many, many levels. It is, in my opinion, a catastrophe on the new government along, you could even say, with the EU to resolve this whole thing. It is the failure of noticing that fascistic, anti-Ukraine, frankly speaking, pro-Russian groups are sort of inserting themselves as leaders of those protests or strong supporters of those protests. Like, for example, in Poland, most of the strongest supporters of those protests are members of the Konfederacja party, which is the most far-right party you have in the entirety of Poland, the most outright fascistic or even Nazi-like party, like the party that has its most famous 5 points no European Union, no Jewish people, no LGBT, no abortion. What was the fifth one of their amazing points? I actually have to look up their 5 points. Okay. The 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, yeah, that's the 5th one. So the 5 is, yeah, no taxes. Thank you, Kittany. Thank you. No taxes. Thank you. Amazing. So no Jewish people, LGBT, abortion, no European Union, no taxes. That is the party that sort of inserts itself as the biggest supporter of the border protests, of farmers blocking Ukrainian trucks. And recently, as part of the protest, this big part of the protest that the protesters are very, very proud of, is the spilling of the grain. Polish farmers spill grain from Ukrainian trucks on border. As part of the protest. You know, the grain that is being gathered in wartime conditions under bombing, mining, and all that other good stuff. Yeah, that is definitely the way to move forward. Polish farmers scatter Ukrainian grain along borders. You'll see now. Pretty, in my opinion, disgusting behavior. But what do I know? I'm just a person. Polish farmers scatter Ukrainian grain along borders. Polish farmers emptied the trucks and scattered Ukrainian grain along the roads. Polish farmers on Sunday staged a protest near the border village of Dorohusk by spilling Ukrainian grain on the road, denouncing unchecked Ukrainian food imports. One of the organizers of the protest and a member of the right-wing Confederation Alliance, Rafał Meckler, posted photos on social media depicting grain scattered along a motorway in southern Poland. In Dorohusk, farmers spilling grain from trucks, and the trucks are returning to Ukraine, Meckler wrote, which, with this strong arm of proudness, Rafał Meckler has declared how well done. We've done so well in ruining in grain that could go to places where it's needed. Well done. And should I remind you that a strong talking point of the Confederacy Party was the infamous slogan, "Stop the Ukrainization of Poland"? That the Confederacy Party has been very strongly anti-Ukrainian throughout this war. During the parliamentary election, it has run on slogans such as "Take away all social services towards Ukrainians," stop supporting Ukrainians. Let's take care of our own, quote unquote. And this is part of it. I'm sorry. This is part of it. This is part of this whole anti-Ukraine movement within the party that sort of attaches itself to this protest and promotes and celebrates all anti-Ukrainian action. Confederacy Party is just Nazis, yes? Basically, yes. Rolnicy z Dorochuska uhonorowali Kołodziejczaka. Why is this happening? In early November 2023, Polish truckers blockaded highways at checkpoints along the border with Ukraine to protest the Polish government's failure to address their business losses to foreign competitors. The core of their grievance lies in the exemption granted to Ukrainian truckers from acquiring permits to cross the Polish border since February 2022, making their services more cost-effective and appealing to customers. Moreover, farmers in neighboring countries have complained about product surpluses affecting domestic prices, which, by the way, the protest does not work the other way around. The fact that Ukraine is flooded with Polish products does not seem to be an issue in the slightest. In this whole calculation, Ukraine being flooded with Polish products seems to be perfectly fine. In September 2023, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary decided to impose their own restrictions on Ukrainian grain imports after the European Commission opted not to extend a ban affecting Ukraine's 5 EU neighbors. So far, Poland has still not lifted the ban it imposed on Ukrainian grain imports, but has not yet felt any consequences despite having violated one of the basic principles of the EU's trade policy, according to Polish newspaper Rzeczpospolita. The report further stated that Kyiv has still not withdrawn its claims with the WTO over Poland's ban on Ukrainian grain imports. The European Commission proposed extending tariff-free entry for Ukrainian agricultural products for another year, starting in June, but with a number of measures to protect Europe's own farmers. The WTO case is still open and the dispute remains unresolved, despite the European Commission's recent move, the reports noted. Like, this should be resolved. This sort of thing cannot just happen during a war. Like, this is, in my view, like a failure. This is a failure on the new government, that this is not being resolved. This is a failure of... Oh, I don't know. Why has this not been resolved yet? It's been so long. And still, the borders are just... Now we're having the grain spilled, which feeds into the anti-Ukrainian, of course, sentiment of people saying, oh, those Ukrainians, they're at war, they just want to bleed us dry and they need to be helped no matter what, even if we die or something. Like, ridiculous. If there are certain unfair things that the farmers perceive they are experiencing, this should be a thing to discuss with the Polish government, not by blocking and hindering the Ukrainian side during a big war, which could still end very badly for Ukraine. Like, we cannot separate these things. We cannot just separate neatly that the protest is a totally separate thing from the war. The war is happening all the time while this is happening, so these things will be inevitably connected. And the fact that on the one hand the government is talking all the time of support for Ukraine on many different levels, and on the other hand is not doing anything that it can to resolve this thing as soon as possible, is very disappointing. It's very disappointing indeed. For a while it seemed that things would be getting better with the whole protest thing, but nope. It's back. It's as bad as ever. It's actually gotten worse because now we're seeing grain itself being wasted, being just spilled, proudly cheered on by Confederacy members. I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say. Besides the fact that I'm quite disappointed by this turn of events. I guess that's the thing that I can say. I'm disappointed. I am feeling disappointed. So that's Poland. That's what's happening right now in Poland. So what do you think? Enjoyable segment? Depressing segment? Oh yeah. There is an investigation going on by the police when it comes to the grain thing. Thank God. If that would go without any sort of investigation, that would have been so bad. I wouldn't even know what to say to that. Into woke Stalin, the collects have multiplied. I mean, Stalin has done enough. I think. I feel Stalin has done enough. Oh yeah! By the way, did you know that apparently Russia started using Starlink terminals? There's been a whole talk of how... There's been a whole thing about Ukraine using the Starlink terminals to supplement its informational network to play video games, the World of Tanks or something. There's been a lot of talk of that, how at one point Elon Musk has started cutting off signal for Ukrainian forces because he said he didn't want Starlink to be used for war. During a big Crimea offensive, especially during that. And then the signing of the deal with SpaceX, was it? And now it seems like the Russians are setting up their little Starlink dishes themselves. Right? And now everybody's asking, is Elon Musk supplying Russians with Starlink. What is happening here? The prevailing opinion is that Russia is getting these Starlink sort of dishes uh, via off the protocol methods, and they're just setting them up in the occupied areas within, they're setting them up near the front line, etc. And that it's basically very difficult for SpaceX to determine which ones are legit and which ones are not, which I'm not sure if I'm not sure if this argument convinces me. Elon Musk himself has made a statement. Elon Musk himself has made a statement on this whole thing. He said, and let me quote him, "A number of false news reports claim that SpaceX is selling Starlink terminals to Russia. This is categorically false. To the best of our knowledge, no Starlinks have been sold directly or indirectly to Russia." Yes, I just said it. He did at one point disrupt the signal for certain Ukrainian operations, yes, because he claimed he didn't want Starlink to be used for war, even though again he gave Starlink to Ukraine, which was at war, which is a very contradictory and baffling statement to provide Starlink to a country at war and then say it shouldn't be used for war, but you know. So yeah, like Russia is one way or the other using Starlink now. Even if it's not being sold directly by SpaceX, it's still being used. Russia using Musk's Starlink, Ukraine Army intelligence says. Let's look for something like, I don't know, more recent. Here we go. Elon Musk. Elon Musk pushes back on Ukraine's claim that Russian forces are using Starlink. Let's see. Let's see the pushback of our beloved and trustworthy Elon Musk. We all love Elon Musk, don't we? We all do love Elon Musk here, right? All of the Lucy viewers are big fans of Elon Musk, right? You were all fans of the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk, right? And all the beautiful changes that have been made since to the page. Elon Musk denied Ukrainian claims that Russians are using Starlink. Now that is a bold claim, since there seems to be not a small amount of evidence that the Russian forces are actually setting up dishes of Starlink. And the prevailing explanation for that was that they were getting them illegally, and that it's not as easy for SpaceX to determine which setup dishes are Ukrainian dishes and which ones are Russians, which I guess, I don't know, I could buy that. I guess I could buy that. Oh, this is important. This is actually a very important part. Musk said that Starlink is inoperable in Russia, but that's the thing. Russian soldiers are not setting up Starlink in Russia. They're setting it up near the front line, which is in Ukraine, not in Russia. So you see how this little statement already sort of is iffy, right? This little statement Musk said that Starlink is inoperable in Russia. That is already sort of right. Russian soldiers are not setting it up in Russia. That's the whole thing. That's the whole point. Both Musk and Starlink did not clarify if the technology could be used in Russian occupied regions. There you go. So this is what we call a dodge. This is what we call a dodge. What do you mean Russians are using Starlink? It's inoperable in Russia. Well, that's not what everybody's saying, is it? Nobody's saying that Russians are using Starlink in Russia. That's not the point at all. Elon Musk on Sunday said Ukraine's assessment that Russians are using Starlink in their ongoing war is false. Earlier on Sunday, Ukrainian military intelligence said Russia is using Musk satellites to facilitate communications on the battlefield, which is, again, the battlefield is in Ukraine. The battlefield is not in Russia. So saying that it's inoperable in Russia means nothing. The intelligence agency posted audio of an exchange between two Russian soldiers from the 83rd Assault Brigade in Donetsk region, claiming that the Russians were speaking over Starlink. Also, why would that is my biggest question. That is my biggest question that I would like answered. Why would the Ukrainian military intelligence lie about Russian forces using Starlink? What would Ukraine have to gain about lying about something like this? What is the gain? Ukraine intelligence did not specify how many terminals it believed Russia had or how they might have been obtained. Still, Ukrainian military intelligence spokesperson Andriy Yusov said that the use of Starlink by Russians was becoming systemic. Not so, says Musk. I don't know. Like, I guess we only have both sides saying their part, but on the other side, I don't know. I'm not sure who I trust more, the Ukrainian military intelligence, who actually has no interest in lying about this, or Elon Musk, who actually has a huge interest in lying about it. You know? We have one party that doesn't actually, as far as I know, have a huge incentive in lying about this. And we have the other party that actually has a huge incentive. A number of false news reports claim that SpaceX is selling Starlink terminals to Russia. This is categorically false. Musk posted on X in response to the reports. To the best of our knowledge, no Starlinks have been sold directly or indirectly to Russia. I mean, there are many possibilities here. The big possibility that has been floated around is that Russia has been obtaining those illegally. And what Elon Musk is saying here is not even, he's not even sort of refuting that here, keep in mind. Like, he's not refuting this here. He is saying, we're not selling it, directly or indirectly. It's inoperable in Russia, which technically speaking means they could be operable within Ukraine territory, for example, the occupied territory and in near the front line. And two, even if they're not selling it, they could be obtaining them through different means other than directly or indirectly buying it from SpaceX, which has not really been addressed here. That there could be simply other means of obtaining those. You know? In a follow-up statement, Musk clarified that Starlink would not connect to devices in Russia, which again, in Russia, Starlink satellites will not close the link in Russia, Musk wrote. SpaceX also posted a statement on Thursday saying Starlink is not active in Russia, which is a very misleading statement because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. If SpaceX obtains knowledge that Starlink terminal is being used by a sanctioned or unauthorized party, will investigate the claim and take actions to deactivate the terminal if confirmed, the company wrote on X. And from what I've heard, from what I've read, when checking this thing out, it's actually not as easy for SpaceX to determine which terminals are when near the front line, etc., which terminals are used by Ukrainian forces and which ones are used by Russian forces. That it's not as easy to determine, it seems. Which would make, apparently, it difficult to disable them. Which I'm willing to accept that it might be just sort of like a technical thing or incompetence on SpaceX part. And that Russia is just simply getting those terminals in some illegal way and sort of exploiting the fact that it's not as easy to determine which side is using them. I mean, that's not surprising in the slightest. However, both Musk and SpaceX did not clarify whether the technology could be used in Ukrainian regions occupied by Russia. Users who purchase Starlink services are uniquely identified and must go through an authentication process before using Starlink satellites. Per a Wall Street Journal analysis, Russian soldiers could have obtained Starlink equipment from Ukrainians through battle and connected to the satellites that way. There you go. Already a plausible sort of explanation has been given. Obtained from Ukrainians through battle and connected to the satellites that way. I mean, in this case, the verification would have already been done. The process of authentication would have already been done. So they wouldn't even have to go through this. There you go. It is possible that Russian forces have captured Starlink equipment from Ukrainian soldiers, allowing them to tap into the Starlink network, per the journal. It's possible. It's a pretty simple explanation, and it's possible. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and SpaceX did not immediately respond to a request for comment sent by Business Insider. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has been working to remove Ukraine's access to Starlink satellites, which the embattled region has been relying on for its communications. Space warfare analysts who spoke to Business Insider say that Russia's jamming efforts of Starlink have not been successful thus far. So we've seen this. What do you think of the whole Starlink thing? And I wonder if we'll get like more news on this. From this development. Let's see. New. Okay, let's look for something else. So the Elon Musking is for 24 minutes ago, so I guess we'll have to wait for new developments. Would be wild if Elon actually smuggled them. That would be very stupid on his part, though. It would be very stupid on his part. So I guess that's the newest thing when it comes to the Starlink. Because there's nothing newer. The whole Elon Musk statement is the newest development in this little story. What do you think? Are you impressed? Have you been left impressed? However, it should be easy to block the device in areas that are known to not be in Ukrainian hands. Well, the problem is that there is a stalemate at the front line. So it's not actually easy to determine which areas are in Ukrainian hands because Russians and Ukrainians are in close proximity to each other. For example, shooting artillery rounds at each other. So there's no neat, clear-cut sort of this area is Ukrainian, this area is Russian, because the two groups are within kilometers from one another, within artillery range. There is not this clear, neat sort of separation between them. Yeah. And those devices could be like within kilometers from one another. So how would you determine which kilometer is usually known to be in Ukrainian hands? How would you determine that if those small areas switch hands all the time? How exactly would you determine that? There's no way. There's no way. Like if a Russian unit pushes back a Ukrainian unit and gets a Starlink and just sets it up for themselves, how would SpaceX determine that? How would SpaceX just determine that it's not in Ukrainian hands anymore? Like it would be like if someone killed me and just continued using my internet as me. How would the internet provider even know that I'm not the one using the internet anymore if the bills kept being paid? The answer is the internet company would not know, to use your analogy of thinking how I connect to my internet provider. That is one possibility that has been floated around. That the soldiers just wrestle dishes that are already in use by Ukrainians and just use them themselves. Not good. Not good. Not good. I guess Russians are gonna play World of Tanks as well now. It seems. And Angry Birds or whatever. Or whatever Russian games they play. Plus, as I've said before, Starlink really doesn't know the device identifiers for all the devices donated by individuals and charity. Right, yeah. That's a problem. And I'm not sure what the solution to this problem is supposed to be quite honest. Like I don't even know what the solution to this is supposed to be. Like it just right now it just feels like Russians will just use Starlink and that's that. It's just I don't know. Yeah, probably, yeah. And that sucks. Like putting aside the horrible taking away the signal during the Crimea thing and one other thing. Like Starlink has been a great tool for the Ukrainian forces, and unfortunately, it could actually also become a great tool in Russian forces. So that is certainly an unfortunate turn of events that a powerful tool like this is being used by Russians. Russia. Russia. The solution could be to in pre-arranged times change the verification codes or something like that. Don't have the specifics of how the device operate. Oh, yeah. But then again, that could also sort of hmm, that's true. That is a good point. That is indeed a good point. That is indeed a good point. So Musk has said. Oh, Jesus. So, Alexei Danilov, the Secretary of the Rada of Defense, of National Defense, the Defense Council, I guess, the National Defense Council, the Secretary of the National Defense Council, and it's okay. I'm gonna translate it one again. Alexei Danilov, the Secretary of National Security Council and Defense, has said that the Ukrainian army is standing on the brink of a very difficult moment on the battlefield. That the situation on the front might become drastically worse if the West will not increase its weapon shipments. The situation on the front is very difficult. From from the 24th February of 2022, it has never been easy. And if anybody thinks that the front line is simple, then these are the people that do not understand war, he said. He also added that Russia is receiving weapons from North Korea and Iran, which has created certain changes on the front line. We need weapons, he said. And of course, we all know that uh, Russia, for example, has been firing shells at the rate of 5-1, that Ukraine has to ration shells, that there is a critical ammunition shortage, that Ukraine has had to cancel certain operations due to the shortages. We know that the European Union has not been able to keep its promise when it comes to the number of delivered shells by March, or is looking not to be able to keep that promise. We know that the US aid is being held up. And so we are suddenly looking at a very, very, very dire situation. And the problem is not even not giving the heavy weapons. The problem is the rate at which the weapons were being supplied, the timing at which the weapons were being supplied. Usually when the Ukrainian side was running out, the next shipment would come. It was not a steady flow that would give sort of, and it was possible from the beginning to give Ukraine, especially with the help of the US, to give Ukraine a nice steady flow that would actually give Ukraine, especially at the beginning of the invasion when Russian forces were very incompetent, a big advantage of Ukraine over Russia. But that did not happen. What instead happened was this little bit by bit aid, usually continued when the Ukrainian side was running out of what was given before, which was a horrible way to sort of handle this. And this has been pointed out by many commentators, by military experts in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine, time and time again from the very beginning of the war. So it's not new. Many people knew this, many people screamed about it time and time again, and for some reason this never changed. So time is Russia's friend. Like at the beginning, Russia was fumbling and trembling, was very incompetent. That was the moment actually to really, really hammer in the good amount of aid. When the Russian forces were still being incompetent, stupid, when things were going bad for Russia, that was the moment to sort of really give Ukraine what it needed. Not this. It actually gave Russia time to sort of make up for its mistakes at the beginning, and it's just learning as it goes. And let's not make a mistake, it is improving, it's doing better and better, even though thousands of Russians are dying along the way. You know? And various groups of tactically relevant systems being given out in stages, typically months too late, and quite literally entrench itself. And also, of course, there's the fact that in many cases, and that is also not a thing that is being talked about enough, that certain systems were given to certain teams, certain units, and then the units received spare parts for systems that they were not even using, so they were useless for them. It's the issues of the aid are quite numerous. Then there was the infamous counteroffensive in 2023, during which the US advisors prepared a plan for Ukraine that was impossible to do because Ukraine lacked the equipment to carry out the plan pushed by US advisors. Remember that? The situation is getting really serious. A lot of the media sort of decided at some point that Russia is just so incompetent that it basically has already lost, which created this false image in some people's heads that maybe additional aid is not even necessary, that Russia is so bad and incompetent that it basically will, I don't know, defeat itself almost, that Ukraine does not even have to do much anymore. It's really bad. It's really, really bad. And it seems like it's about to get worse. And if it gets worse, if it gets the worse, then I guess I better read the books that I've got at home faster because they're gonna get bombed and burned, and that's gonna be that. That's gonna be that, especially since the possibly future President Trump is already announcing more or less that if the place where I live gets attacked, the US will wipe its hands and not help. So Ukraine didn't botch it too hard. There were only a handful of days with the breach attempts with higher losses, and then they changed tactic, right? It's bad. It's all very, very bad. If they had nukes, Russia wouldn't have invaded. That's true. I mean, they just wouldn't have invaded. Which, again, if the US just decides to betray all of its allies, that will be a clear signal for all the current US allies to just race for the nukes. That will be it. Just race for the nukes. The US is not really a reliable partner in anything. Ukraine will just be seen as an example of how duped you are if you give up your nuclear arsenal, and if you don't have it, you should just sprint for it. You should just go for it. You should just go for it and for deterrence policy or something. Yep, if the US drops the ball on this one, a lot of countries that don't have nukes but can be making them will go for it, of course. Why would they not if they basically see a first-hand example of a country that gave up its nuclear arsenal and was rewarded with a full-scale invasion with a side dish of genocide and abandonment by the US. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, of course. The Iran thing was, oh yeah. I'm sorry, what? Okay, I have to look at this because Jesus Christ, Duda, I don't know. Let me see. Donald Tusk komentuje słowa Trumpa. There we go. Donald Tusk. I almost said it in English. Donald Tusk. I almost said Donald Tusk. My goodness. Donald Tusk sort of commented on Trump, and then Andrzej Duda commented on Donald Tusk. So, Duda. So we're gonna take a look at both. Oh my god, I forgot about that. So, Donald Tusk reacts to the words of Donald Trump and was responded to by Andrzej Duda. This should be interesting. This is something like there used to be this Polish parody / satirical program, I think in the 90s. It was called The Polish Zoo. It was a puppet show about the current state of politics in Poland and Polish sort of, Polish domestic and foreign affairs, okay? It was, every Polish politician was sort of represented by an animal puppet, and they would sort of parody current events and news. And it really feels like the Polish zoo is in full swing right now. The Polish zoo is in full swing with the whole dynamic between Donald Tusk and Andrzej Duda. It feels like we're seeing the revival of the satirical program in real life. Only it's not parody. It just is. What am I reacting to now? Wrong thing. Hold on. I need this, not here. There we go. So there we go. There we go with this. So, the former leader of the USA, Donald Trump, has said that if he becomes president again, he will not help NATO countries attacked by Russia if they will lag behind in their payments to NATO. Maybe this would be a good topic for your special meeting, Mr. President. He is sort of referencing a meeting that the Polish President Andrzej Duda wants to hold with everybody involved in the government, okay? That's a Polish internal thing. Said Donald Tusk to our beloved President Andrzej Duda. And then a response of Andrzej Duda appeared. When Andrzej Duda says something, it usually is so stupid that it beggars belief. But, of course, first it was the Crimea thing, saying that it's been historically Russian. Then it's been the Donald Trump is a very serious man and keeps his word always thing. Then, and now this. So Andrzej Duda responds to Donald Tusk, insulting half of the political scene of the USA will not be good for our interests, said Andrzej Duda. Basically saying that you shouldn't criticize Donald Trump. It's against our interest to criticize Trump and the GOP because, you know, Donald Trump probably will be the rival of Joe Biden in this year's elections, presidential elections in USA. And then they talk about the whole thing with NATO, how Trump said that if you don't pay, you get to be attacked by Russia, and I will endorse it and tell them to do whatever they want. I would encourage Russia to do whatever it wants. USA will not defend the countries of NATO after the Russian invasion. Reactions to Trump's statements. So the statement of Trump's have created some controversy, of course. Andrew Bates has said that encouraging regimes to invade our closest allies is scary and unhinged. And of course, Donald Tusk has also spoke on X/Twitter. President Duda has said that President Trump always keeps his word. And he also said that he will encourage Russia to attack any NATO country. Maybe this would be a good topic for a discussion, Mr. President. The Prime Minister of Poland has asked the President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, we're spending 4% of our GDP on defense, which is, if that would be enough to defend against Russia in the future, is sort of debatable. And then Andrzej Duda added a comment. A US-Polish alliance has to be strong, no matter who is in charge in Poland or in the US. I have always worked like that, and I will work in this spirit. I will respect all our US partners. So in other words, Andrzej Duda has said, to translate this sort of thing from my broken translation, I kiss the ass of anyone that's in the US, no matter what they believe or what they say. We must have a strong alliance between Poland and the US, even if we basically know that the US can abandon us at any time and not really care about the alliance. So a pretty one-sided alliance, to be quite honest. And that, yeah, pretty famously, Andrzej Duda said that from his perspective, it doesn't even matter who wins the election. From the perspective of Andrzej Duda, the president of Poland, as he said, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter who wins. Yes, and it's been a big controversy years ago. He added that insulting half of the American political scene will not be in our interest, economic or safety interest. By the way, thanks to our smart policy in the last 8 years, we're spending 4% of the GDP for our defense, thanks to which we are safe. This is so weird how, first of all, Andrzej Duda is basically saying that whether or not we can count on US to support us when the time comes, we still have to lick Trump's ass if he wins. And also, it is so weird how this ultra important topic is once again being used for very sad internal Polish politics. Like, it's just sad. It is just very sad that this sort of thing is just used for internal Polish bickering, which, well, it's very disappointing. Unfortunately, at this point, it's not exactly surprising either. Okay. So I guess, how long have I been streaming today? 4 hours. So I guess I'm going to finish for today. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone involved. And I'll see you tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow. Farewell. Farewell.